Zombies. Zombies everywhere today in cinema. In fact, it's one of the most profitable subgenres within the whole of horror, with over 600 films to date. But where did it all start? I'm about to go way back to the beginning of zombie cinema and show you how it all began, and guide you through to where we are now. But what causes so many of these films to be made?
It's that feeling of being trapped, the breakdown of society.
Audiences dig this stuff. It's what if this really happened? What could happen? I like the kind of recent innovation in the one of the films set in London, 28 Days Later.
I think people like the idea of a kind of an unstoppable force, of something that's simultaneously familiar but also is going to rip your face off.
The first ever feature film about zombies was an independent film called White Zombie from 1932. But it didn't come from Universal, which dominated the horror genre throughout the 30s and 40s, but instead a small independent company named Helperlin. If you're after brains being eaten and limbs being torn apart, then this isn't the film for you.
It's all very much linked up with the traditional sense of zombies, as in Haitian zombies, the ones who were sort of, they get buried, they come back from the dead, and then they're treated as slaves effectively.
These zombies were of a different breed. This film plays on the idea of someone being controlled by a master to do their bidding. The hunger for brains and human flesh would only come in 30 years' time with directors such as George Romero and Lucio Fulci. It features Bela Lugosi as an evil voodoo master, and being that he's fresh from Dracula, he's in top performance here. His demonic stare gazes at you throughout the whole film, and by the end of it, you feel like a zombie. Up until films like Night of the Living Dead, zombie movies were focused very much on voodoo and witchcraft, very much in the way that I Walked with a Zombie was. There are other films worth mentioning here, but this is definitely the best from this era. The film came out in 1943 and was made by RKO Pictures, which was one of the reigning production companies of this time. The film focuses around a young nurse who tells us the story of how she once walked with a zombie.
I walked with a zombie. Does seem an odd thing to say. Had anyone said that to me a year ago, I'm not at all sure I would have known what a zombie was.
Again, this film doesn't rely on gore to encapsulate you, but instead uses fantastic mise-en-scène to create very eerie and dreamlike sequences.
So films like White Zombie, I Walked with a Zombie, these films took voodoo as the kind of source for where the zombies came from.
All that was about to change, and in 1968 a small unknown independent director by the name of George A. Romero would change the face of zombie cinema forever. Where up until now, zombie movies were focused around the idea of someone dying, being brought back to life, and then being under the control of a master, Romero thought, what if these beasts had no master? What would happen if they were just allowed to roam free? And what we get is the groundbreaking masterpiece that is Night of the Living Dead.
He brought the flesh-eating zombie to life, your stereotype zombie movie.
The Night of the Living Dead, as I say, kind of changes everything really, and it's that film I think that we've got to thank for what came afterwards. We've also got the first time that you see zombies truly as cannibals as well, eating human flesh in Night of the Living Dead.
So Night of the Living Dead, you know, Day of the Dead, films like that would be the ones I would immediately think of first off. And you know, I know that George Romero is the man, you know.
It was Romero who set about most of the conventions that later zombie films would then follow, and he would forever be inside a genre that he loved. He once said, "As a filmmaker you get typecast just as much as an actor does, so I'm trapped in a genre that I love, but I am trapped in it." As big as Night of the Living Dead was, it wasn't until Romero's next movie that zombies would finally become mainstream and spark this entirely new wave of cinema. Night of the Living Dead then sparked a global trend with many countries bringing out their own zombie movies. One great example is Jorge Grau's Let Sleeping Corpses Lie from 1974. This movie was Spanish, but it was shot in the UK. Where no real explanation was ever given for the dead returning in Night of the Living Dead, here we are led to believe that due to pesticides in the amount being emitted, that this is what created the zombies. This film is interesting in itself because it appears to have an eco message without being too heavy, which reflects social anxiety at the time. Ten years after George Romero shocks the world with Night of the Living Dead, he does it again with Dawn of the Dead, a colour sequel that also stands on its own. The story is the same as Night of the Living Dead, with the zombies walking around trying to eat people, and everybody trying to survive, which leaves our main characters trapped inside a shopping mall.
You know, for me, again going back to Dawn of the Dead, that was being trapped in a shopping mall. You've got everything that you need. You've got your food, water, heating, shelter, but you're still not safe. You know, there is no way safe.
The shopping mall itself allows for great scenarios and comedic effect, but a lot of audiences interpret this as social satire, comparing the zombies to mall shoppers, which is very easy to see. For the time, this might have been one of the bloodiest, goriest films ever made, and it shocked a lot of audiences that watched it. But for those who were bold enough to sit through it, they could see how creative a lot of the special effects were, which are courtesy of the effects maestro Tom Savini, who also acts in the movie. Romero would then follow this film with Day of the Dead from 1985 and Land of the Dead from 2005. These films themselves reflect the decade, which is what Romero always tried to do. What we then get is a strand of international movies trying to imitate the success of Romero, like the massive cult favourite Zombie Flesh Eaters, or Zombie depending on what version you're seeing. This was directed by Lucio Fulci and came out in 1979, a year after Dawn of the Dead.
It was made effectively to cash in on Romero's Dawn of the Dead from 1978, but in many respects it actually goes back to those earlier films where the actual zombie disease, or if we can call it that, what's responsible for these people turning into zombies, coming back to life, seems to be quite a religious thing, or it's thought to be something religious or have some links with religion. Nobody really quite knows. There's no real explanation in Zombie Flesh Eaters why these people are returning back to life.
The film itself really does the genre justice. There is enough blood and guts for any gore fan, and probably one of the only films that feature a zombie vs shark fight. And forever be infamous for the certain scene.
For a good zombie movie, an hour and a half, I want people being chased, I want screaming, I want like Flesh Eaters for example, scenes that people remember in Flesh Eaters. One of the most famous scenes has to be the shard of wood that goes through the woman's eye, that's what we all remember as kids, that's what we loved as kids, I think a lot of movies at the moment, they're making it look too clean, too nice, too clinical, they're missing out on a lot of what a zombie movie is about.
This film really gave life to zombie cinema throughout the 80s and 90s, especially to the Italians that produced some really amazing films in terms of zombie. Nightmare City from 1980 by Umberto Lenzi is one example. However, it's argued that they are not really zombies in this film. I say that they are, due to them mindlessly attacking and eating anybody in their way. This is also the first zombie film with very fast-paced zombies in it, which is strange because most people believe that the fast zombie came about in the noughties with films like 28 Days Later and the Dawn of the Dead remake. In Nightmare City, these creatures not only have full use of their legs but also weapons and vehicles. It's definitely worth a watch. Everyone seemed to forget about zombies for a while in the 90s, and it wasn't until 2004 when Danny Boyle made 28 Days Later that zombies would take centre stage once again. This film was a huge success because it was something new, something that audiences hadn't seen before, which was what the genre was crying out for.
Suddenly the zombies are running full speed, and they're not these slow, you know, kind of lurching things, but suddenly they're fast, they've got power, they've got energy, they're like people, but hungry as hell and ready to rip out your gallbladder.
And it wasn't until 28 Days Later came out, which was a totally new concept for everybody. It was fast. Arguably, they're not actually zombies either, you know, they're not people coming back to life. They're more people infected by rage, the rage virus.
But then we get Danny Boyle's 28 Days Later, and I think it's probably the first zombie movie for a long time where, because it was presented almost as a more mainstream film and people knew Danny Boyle from other films prior to this, that a lot of people went to see 28 Days Later who perhaps wouldn't normally have gone to see a zombie movie.
Yes, it was Danny Boyle who revived a classic genre and made a surge of straight-to-DVD films after it, very much in the way that Dawn of the Dead and George Romero did. Zombies have still been prominent in the last few years of cinema, with films like Zombieland drawing in huge crowds and inviting new fans to the genre. What we also get in 2012 is Paranorman, which is a zombie film aimed at children, which back 50 or 60 years ago was unheard of. But of course, the big one that is soon to come out is World War Z, starring Brad Pitt, with the Z obviously standing for zombie, and suddenly it isn't Night of the Living Dead anymore, but World of the Living Dead. With this huge film about to come out, I think it will enhance the genre like never before, and give fans like me what we've been waiting for.